Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Warlock Sorcerer multi-class build ideas. Now, one of the reasons I really like these classes combined together is because they both use Charisma as their prime casting stat. But I find there's a lot of synergy even beyond that, and we're going to go into some of that in this video. We're also going to look at multiple ways that you can play it. There's two main ones. One, of course, is just to be the ranged caster. You stand back, you use things like Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast, Invocation to boost your damage up, and then combine it with things like Quicken Spell in order to be able to do it twice in one round and deal even more damage. But the other one is to be a melee character, and we're going to take a look at that later on as well. There's also different variants on each one, on which subclass you might want to take or what level breakdowns. So we're going to take a look at all those things in this video, as well as which invocations you might want to choose, depending on which way you decide to play the character. So we'll start with the first one, and that is just to be mostly a caster. This is a fairly obvious one. Since D&D 5th edition first launched, people were already coming up with the idea of the Sorlock, which was basically just to take a couple levels of Warlock and all the rest Sorcerer. So your basic concept is 2 levels of Warlock, as many levels as you can of Sorcerer, even all the way up to 18th eventually, and then you just take your couple invocations. Usually one is going to be Agonizing Blast, the other might be Repelling Blast or Eldritch Spear or something along those lines usually, and you're just going to cast Eldritch Blast over and over again and use your sorcery points for quicken spells in order to be able to use it twice in one round. You might also want to use a Hex or something like that and then combine that as well. Cast Hex in the first round if you think you're going to be in a long fight, and then the next round you can quicken it, and now you're applying that damage over and over again, combined with your Hexes, combined with casting the spell twice per round. The damage is actually pretty insane, so it's pretty obvious why people like this. Another basic variant is just to take Warlock 3 instead of Warlock 2. Now, the main advantage of Warlock 2 is that if really all you wanted was Agonizing Blast, you might as well just take that and move on. This is going to allow you to get your spell casting progression a lot sooner. It means you're going to be able to get your sorcerer spells and abilities faster. And that third level of Warlock might not really be bringing much else to the table. If all you really wanted was to do more damage in combat, then the third level of Warlock isn't going to give you much. However, the advantage of Warlock 3 is it can add a lot more versatility, because now you can take a Pact. Usually you're going to take either Pact of the Tome or Pact of the Chain in this situation, because there's no real point taking Blade if you're going to be focusing on spellcasting, of course. Chain is going to give you a really nice familiar. It's very strong at lower levels. The problem is your familiar doesn't scale at all, and you're going to have the same familiar at level 20 as you do at level 3. So if you don't really plan on doing that a lot, or you could just take, find familiar from Pact of the Tome because it's a ritual, then you may not really care about that as much. However, something like an Imp or a Quasit is very, very flavorful and can be a lot of fun. They also have a lot more versatility than your average familiar because they can actually be useful in combat. They can take the help action and give you advantage on attack rolls, things like that. I've even seen people do crazy stuff with an Imp, like have it fly flasks of acid over enemies and then drop the acid on them. And as long as the flasks are small and light, then, there should be nothing wrong with that. It has flight and it has a strength score, even though it's ridiculously weak. So you can do a lot of creative things with one. However, most people, and my personal recommendation, is probably going to choose Pact of the Tome. This is going to give you a book with some ritual spells that you can record in it, and you get 3 rituals initially, but also any rituals you learn from any class can be recorded into the book. It's very, very powerful, especially compared to most other people who have ritual spellcasting. It's kind of like the 3 levels. You've got Pact of the Tome at the very top, you got wizards below them who can use ritual spells without using a spell slot, and then you've got all the other rituals casters below that. Then you've got people who don't even have ritual casting. Sorcerers, paladins, whatnot. So Pact of the Tome is going to give you even more versatility, allowing you to pick up things, like commune or whatever from clerics, as well as good rituals like scrying or contact other plane from wizards, and plus all your own. You can grab druid rituals. Druids actually have a lot of decent rituals as well, and it's just going to give you a lot more flexibility. So that's the reason you might want to consider Warlock 3. Is just if you wanted to be able to do a lot of ritual casting or have a really good familiar. As I mentioned, though, you can take Find Familiar as one of your rituals in the Pact of the Tome, though, and you'll just have the basic standard wizard familiar, which is, pretty good as well, right? Not as good as an imp, but still pretty decent. So that's the main idea there. You're probably going to be looking to take either... Well, my personal recommendation for the Sorcerer subclass would probably be Shadow Magic. And I'll talk about the reasons in a moment. But I think for Warlock, really, your subclass here isn't going to matter as much. If you're choosing, to have your patron of like a fiend, you can get temporary hit points back when you get a kill. That kind of thing is pretty neat. But if you're only taking 2 or 3 levels of Warlock, you're only going to have just your basic level 1 abilities, essentially. So Great Old One's going to give you telepathic communication of a sort. You can project your thoughts. That's actually pretty useful in some circumstances. But a lot of tables just let people talk openly about what they're thinking anyways, and the DM won't care. So the ability to send secret messages to your allies might be great in some campaigns, but it might just be redundant in others because you might just do that kind of thing already. The Archfey is going to give you a couple decent spells, though. It'll give you Fairy Fire for one thing, and it also has an ability where you can try to have like a 10-foot radius AoE, like Charm or Fear, your choice, and just uses your spell save DC. It's actually pretty strong, so I kind of like that one quite a bit in this circumstance. Like I said, the Fiend is going to give you temporary hit points. Hexblade still isn't a bad choice, even on a caster, because it will give you medium armor and a shield. And if you just want to sit back and cast Eldritch Blast, but do it in half plate armor while wearing a shield, you're going to be a lot harder to hit, and that can be perfectly fine. It'll also give you the option of using the Hexblade's Hex instead of using the actual Hex spell. It won't require a spell slot, but at low levels, Hex is probably going to be better. It's going to outdamage it, and you can transfer that Hex from one creature to another, unlike the Hexblade's one, where you really can't. So, overall, there's some good and some bad to have for each. I don't think the Warlock patron choice matters as much. Just choose the one you think is cool, or choose one that you think is going to fit your story better, and go with it. Or, like I said, if you really like something like Fairy Fire, choose Archfey. If you really like Dissonant Whispers or Tasha's Hideous Laughter, I think actually, yeah, that is on the Great Old One list. Then you can choose that too. Sorcerer one, I really like Shadow Magic, like I mentioned, and there's a couple different reasons for this. Number one, at first level, you get the Eyes of the Dark ability. This is very similar to the Devil's Sight invocation that you can get as a Warlock, but it frees you up from having to take that invocation. Basically, you're going to get the Darkness spell for free with Devil's Sight when you hit level 3, and you'll be able to cast that. You can use sorcery points to cast it instead, and if you use sorcery points, then you can actually see in that darkness. It also gives you darkness, or dark vision, for 120 feet. Pretty good in general. And like I said, cost of a couple sorcery points, you can create magical darkness that you can see in. Now, this is really nice if you want to get yourself advantage on all those Eldritch Blasts that you're firing. You could be attacking, at high levels, you could potentially be attacking between 4 and 8 times a round with Eldritch Blasts, and giving yourself advantage on every single one of those. That ends up adding up to a lot of damage. I also like this combination on a range caster because you're less likely to screw over your teammates. I've had this problem in the past where I was playing a Pact of the Blade Warlock and I'd want to cast Darkness on something and use my Devil's Sight to give myself advantage. But then all my teammates are blinded as well. Now technically, they're blinded, but so is the enemy, so they're still attacking normally, but trying to convince your DM of that might not be easy. And you still have a tendency to kind of anger players in your party who maybe wanted to target things with spells, and now they can't see that target. It's a lot easier when you're a ranged caster to just target something that nobody else is on and just fire away at it with advantage. So I like that combination quite a bit. You also get Strength of the Grave. Basically, if you're reduced to 0 hit points but not or less and not killed outright, then you can make a Charisma saving throw to stay at 1 hit point instead. It's kind of like what Barbarians get, except theirs is Con and yours is Charisma. It's a pretty decent ability. I wouldn't say it's phenomenal, but you know, not getting knocked unconscious is always pretty handy. I mean, half-orcs get that for free as a racial ability. That's why I say, I think it's a decent ability. I should rephrase. It's a decent ability, but there's lots of classes that get it, so it doesn't really stand out as much. Like I said, there's even races that get that as a starting ability, right? So while decent and strong, it's also replicated lots of other places as well. The big one, though, is that at level 6, you're going to get your Hound of Ill Omen. Now, the Hound itself will get temporary hit points equal to half your sorcerer levels. That's not a lot. The Hound scales very, very poorly. However, unlike the Familiar, the Hound has one thing that's really, really nice about it. And that is that if it's within 5 feet of a target, that target will have disadvantage against your saving throws. So you could cast Hold Person or Hold Monster on the target, and as long as your Hound is within 5 feet, it has disadvantage. Of course, your Hound doesn't scale, like I said, and it tends to be pretty fragile. So that's not necessarily great. But the Hound has another feature that I really like, and that is that it can travel through terrain and objects and creatures. It counts as difficult terrain, and if it ends its turn inside that terrain, it takes 5 damage. But that's probably a lot less than it's going to take if it gets hit by anything at high levels. So you could have your Hound phase into the ground, stay within 5 feet of the target, take 5 damage a round, but just give that target disadvantage against your saving throws. And you can just do that round after round, and hopefully if the creature doesn't have a lot of movement or doesn't know what's happening and move away, your Hound might be able to just stay within 5 feet of it, inside the ground or floor or wall or whatever else there is, not really be targetable, and sure, it's taking 5 damage, but you know, 5 damage a round isn't really that much, and it still has your temporary hit points from half your caster level. So this is almost an at-will source of disadvantage that isn't going to cost you sorcery points to use like a heightened spell or something, and it means that you, more importantly than using the sorcery points, it means that you don't have to use heightened spell, so you can use a different meta magic on that spell. So if you want to quicken cast a Hold Person, for example, you could quicken cast it while giving them disadvantage from the Shadow Hound, and then cast your Eldritch Blast on top of that now that it's been held, and they're all going to be automatic crits. You're also setting your teammates for a bunch of automatic crits. There's some really nasty combinations you can pull off with this kind of thing. And the Hound can do some decent damage when you're at low level. Like I said, he doesn't scale particularly well, but to me the big advantage is just being able to give your opponent disadvantage. Sorry, that was horrible wording. I did not intend that. But yeah, that's the main thing with the Hound, giving somebody disadvantage without having to use your meta magics, so you can use meta magic on whatever else you were casting. At level 14, you're going to get Shadow Walk. It's pretty nice. Basically, you can just teleport through shadows. Gives you a bit of mobility, which is never a bad thing. And at level 18, you're going to get Umbral Force. This ability is actually pretty sick. Here, I'll just read it to you. Or Umbral Form, sorry. Starting at 18th level, you can spend 6 sorcery points as a bonus action to magically transform yourself into a shadowy form. In this form, you have resistance to all damage except Force and Radiant, and you can move through other creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain. You take 5 force damage if you end your turn inside the object. You can retain it for 1 minute, and ends early if you're incapacitated or you die, or if you dismiss it as a bonus action. So basically, it's kind of like the same thing that your Shadow Hound has, and it's going to give you resistance against every damage type except Force and Radiant. Pretty good. That's only at 18th level though, so if you took 3 levels of Warlock, you're not going to be able to get that. Still pretty strong though. So that's the main thing I like about the shadow magic sorcerers. I also think the shadow magic, thematically, you're getting your powers from the Shadowfell, and I think that combines with Warlock very nicely. Sorry about that. But like I said, thematically, I think that the Warlock and Sorcerer, especially the Shadow Magic Sorcerer, combine very nicely together. There are other alternatives. Storm of the Storm Soul Sorcerers have some pretty decent abilities as well. Get some mobility. You're going to do more thunder and lightning type damage, but combined with something like elemental affinity, that can be decent. But overall, I think that Shadow Magic is probably better here because you're going to be relying on Eldritch Blast for the majority of your damage, which is force, and that's not really going to combine well with, bonus lightning damage and whatnot. It's not that it can't work, I just think that Shadow Magic has more to offer. So the other main variant I wanted to talk about, or the other main concept I want to talk about, was a Pact of the Blade melee Sorcerer Warlock. Now, I'm not saying this is the strongest melee type of character you can make. I think that Paladin Sorcerer or Paladin Warlock is probably going to be stronger if that's what you're looking for. Even something like Bard combined with Pact of the Blade is going to be pretty strong. But this one isn't bad, and there's a couple different reasons. I think that in this case, you're going to want to take 5 to 8 levels of Warlock. I'm kind of liking 6. 6 is going to give you your level 6 patron ability from whichever patron you chose, and it's still going to give you your level 14 sorcerer ability. So it's kind of a nice break off there. But if you wanted to take 5 levels of Warlock only, just get the Thirsting Blade in your second attack around, that's fine. You can still actually do this with even less. Just take 2 or 3 levels of Warlock, skip Thirsting Blade, only make 1 attack around, and just use Green Flame Blade as your main attack. That works as well. But I kind of like the idea of just having the second attack around. Now, the main thing is, your patron choice here is actually going to matter a lot more because you're going to be getting your level 6 abilities with the Warlock as well. I kind of like Archfey again. I've already mentioned a couple of reasons. Fairy Fire is an excellent spell, and especially casting it with a Quicken spell to use it as a bonus action and then giving yourself advantage on that same round is pretty excellent. The AoE Charm or Fear is also very nice. And at level 6, you're going to get Misty Escape, which you can use offensively on a character like this as well. And I think that makes a pretty strong combination where you have a bit more mobility. The Fiend, the temporary hit points are pretty decent. Most of your spells I don't like as much because they tend to be damage spells. A lot of them are fire-based, which could be okay, because I'm going to suggest for this one that if you want to use Green Flame Blade, you're probably going to want to take the Elemental Affinity feat and choose Fire, and take Draconic Sorcerer as your bloodline and choose something that's going to give you Fire, so either Red or Gold Dragon. And then just kind of go all in on the fire damage. And that can actually be a very potent build. And the nice thing about it is, again, you could only get away with a couple levels of Warlock if you really wanted, and it's pretty decent. Great Old One, Dissonant Whispers, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Tech Thoughts. Entropic Ward is pretty good though. That's where you get a level 6. You can use your reaction to impose disadvantage on somebody trying to attack you, and if they miss, you get advantage on your next round on one of your attacks against them. Pretty nice if you're playing a melee character, and can be pretty good combined with things like, say, an Elder Smite to, give yourself double the chances of landing a critical hit, and then double all those crit dice on your smite. So that's pretty potent. I like it a lot. However, obviously, if you're talking about a melee blade lock type of character, you have to talk about Hexblade. It's pretty much required to at least mention the thing. It's going to give you medium armor and a shield, It's going to give you the ability to use Charisma as your prime stat for everything, your melee attacks and your casting. And that ability is like really huge, honestly. It's so good, it's actually, almost too good. So that's going to give you quite a bit on the Hexblade. And like I said, medium armor shield is pretty potent. Now, again, for the Sorcerer background, I'm not saying that you shouldn't consider some of the others, like Celestial and Divine Soul, all have nice things to offer. Again, Shadow Magic has some decent stuff as well. You can use your Eyes of the Dark combo with Darkness, for example. Storm Soul has the mobility, but really I like the Draconic one here. The ability, like I said, you can choose, whichever type of resistance you want, which is kind of nice. So you can choose something like fire, which is pretty common, and now you're going to have resistance to fire damage. You can also have, you're also automatically going to get an extra 1 hit point per level. And considering you're looking at D8s and D6s for hit points, your hit point total is going to really suck for somebody who's in melee a lot. And you're not really going to be able to tank very effectively. I want to make that fairly clear here. You're going to be like a, like DPS type frontliner. If you look at MMO games like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or whatever, think of like a rogue or something like that. You're going to be in the front lines a lot. You're going to be doing some decent melee damage, especially combined with things like smites and whatnot. But you're not wanting to get hit because you're just not going to have the hit points. Draconic will also give you some nice armor class if you're not wearing armor. It'll give you 13 base armor class plus your dexterity mod. But if you're going to go with Hexblade, you might as well just wear armor because it's going to end up working out better overall. Unless you just wanted to dump strength, which you could do, right? Have a decent dex. Take one of the other ones instead of Hexblade. Go with Draconic, so you've got the 13 armor class, maybe a 16 dex start. It's going to start you at 16. That's pretty decent. You can pick up the shield spell, and you're going to be at least somewhat hard to hit, especially at low levels. So that's not bad either. Draconic's going to have a couple other things. So at level 6, you're going to get Elemental Affinity, which is that you get to add your Charisma bonus to damage type of whatever your chosen elemental is. So you're going to choose an element, let's say fire, for example, because you can use it with Green Flame Blade for a nice combination there. And when you deal damage with that elemental type, you get to add your Charisma bonus. So if you have 20 Charisma, you can be adding an extra 5 damage on top of whatever other damage you're doing. It's actually pretty decent, especially, like I said, combined with things like Green Flame Blade, which you can just spam over and over again. Unfortunately, Force isn't one of the damage types listed, so you can't use it with Eldritch Blast. And Booming Blade uses thunder damage, not lightning damage. So be aware of that. Maybe your DM will be cool and let you use it with Booming Blade, I don't know. But you've got Green Flame Blade, which is basically equivalent in most ways. So I don't really see that as a big deal. Go Fire, go Booming Blade, and there you go. Level 14, you're going to get your wings, so that's going to add even more mobility to your character. You'll be able to fly. And basically that's going to be your main idea. So you're going to be combining, 1, maybe 2 attacks around. If you take Thirsting Blade, you can attack twice and then quick and cast a Green Flame Blade, to do a bunch of damage there and make 3 melee attacks in a round if you really want. There's a lot of different options. You can also go heavier on the Warlock side. If you go all the way to 12 Warlock, you'll get the Life Drinker invocation, which is going to add your Charisma bonus to the damage, and you can still grab yourself up to 8 levels of Sorcerer. This is also going to give you more feats, because you're going to have a feat at 4, 8, and 12 from Warlock, and then 4 and 8 from Sorcerer if you took the 8 levels of Sorcerer. It's going to give you less sorcery points overall, but it'll still give you the ability to cast, quicken stuff and getting a 3rd attack around, which will just add that Life Drinker bonus again. And if you're using like Elemental Affinity, or if you're using your chosen element type, let's say like fire, like I said, you can Green Flame Blade somebody on that bonus action, do all that extra damage, plus your Life Drinker damage, plus you're adding the Elemental Affinity damage, and it can start to really stack up and add up pretty quickly. So that's the main concepts there, and a couple, like I said, a couple different variants on each. One thing I forgot to mention, one of the real strengths of this class as well, is the sorcery ability, or the sorcerer ability, to convert your spell points into spell slots and spell slots into sorcery points. Because you can convert your warlock spell slots, which are coming back on a short rest anyways, and convert those into sorcery points. And then when you rest, you're just going to get those spell slots back, and you can convert them into more sorcery points, and you can keep quicken casting things, or twinning spells, or hidden spelling, or whatever you're going to do. I think this works even better on the ranged caster versions of the builds, but it works fine on the melee ones as well. It's just then you're usually more wanting, like if you're going to be in melee, you're probably going to be wanting to use Eldritch Smite, in which case you're going to be wanting to use a lot of your spell slots for that. Granted, you can then convert your sorcery ones into more spell slots, or into more sorcery points, and then convert those into warlock spell slots. That's always another option. And then use those for smites. So there's a lot of flexibility there that you can use, and that's another thing that makes this combination of classes so strong. So I want to quickly go over a lot of the invocations that I really like. Armor Shadow is a pretty decent one. It basically just gives you mage armor for free. Devil's Sight I've mentioned before. This is good on both, and you might even want to consider it even if you took Shadow Magic, because in order to see in magical darkness with Eyes of the Dark, you need to use your sorcery points, and this kind of frees you up from that. I'd probably just use the sorcery points personally, but if you're more on the warlock side and less on the sorcerer side, you don't necessarily have as many spell or sorcery points to work with, and you're going to have more invocations to work with. So Devil's Sight becomes strong there. Obviously Agonizing Blast, even in the melee versions of these combinations, Agonizing Blast is worth considering, because you're still going to want to have some sort of range option for damage probably. And Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast is one of the strongest ones you're going to have. Obviously things that modify your Eldritch Blast, like Repelling Blast, Grasp of Hadar, Eldritch Spear, etc., are always things to consider as well. I should warn you though that it's really easy to just burn all your invocations on just making Eldritch Blast better, and you're not going to have as many invocations as a full 20th level Warlock is going to be. So you kind of need to manage them a little bit, and I probably wouldn't take more than maybe 1 or 2 on Eldritch Blast. Agonizing almost for sure, just because of the stacking with Quicken Spell to just double its effectiveness. But whatever. If you went with Pact of the Tome, Book of Ancient Secrets is almost a must. That's the one that's going to give you your book where you can describe your rituals. It's also going to give you a couple of rituals right off the bat. The whole point of taking Pact of the Tome essentially is for this invocation, so that you can, record rituals in it. Thirsting Blade, like I mentioned already, if you're going to be on a melee type of build, and Eldritch Smite. I really like both of those. Like I said, there are variations where you may not necessarily even need Thirsting Blade. You might just want to use one attack around, Green Flame Blade it up, or use your Eldritch Smites on top of that, and just go through like that. One attack around can be perfectly viable. You're going to be kind of like a rogue, literally in this case, where you only have the one attack, but you hit really, really hard. So things that can give you advantage are going to be very crucial. Yeah, don't miss. Please don't miss. If you only got one attack and you're all in for 50 damage on the one hit, you really don't want to miss. So those are the main ones I wanted to mention. Feats. Most of the general feats I always recommend are going to be pretty decent. If you're going to be maintaining concentration, things like Warcaster are going to be good. Sorcerers already have proficiency on Constitution saving throws, so if you start Sorcerer, that's not really as much of an issue. You might not need Resilient Con. But if you start Warlock, Resilient Con becomes an option. I kind of prefer Warcaster, I think, out of the two, but both are really good. Things like Spell Sniper are pretty handy, and like I already mentioned, Elemental Affinity, if you're planning on just taking one element, going all in on that, and just trying to do as much damage with it as you can, Elemental Affinity is going to make it so that anytime you're rolling damage of that type, all your ones are treated as twos. So things like Green Flame Blade, this isn't bad for it at all. I think it should also apply to the secondary damage done to your other target as well. Now at levels 1 through 4, that secondary damage is only your Charisma mod. But starting at 5, and then every increase after that, 11, 17, then it's D8s plus your Charisma mod, so it should apply to all that too. So you can really get a lot of mileage out of that feat, and I don't think that changing a couple of ones into twos is necessarily a big deal. But let's face it, we've all been in encounters where you hit something, leave it with 1 or 2 hit points left, and now it gets to attack you. And in D&D, there's no like crippling mechanic essentially, right? It's not like Vampire or Shadowrun or some other games where things become more and more debilitated as they take more damage. A dragon with 2 hit points left does the same amount of damage with its breath weapon as that same dragon did with full hit points. So sometimes an extra couple points of damage can really be a big difference. And I kind of like the thematic idea anyways, of like, maybe I'm a gold dragonborn sorcerer and I've got this draconic blood in my ancestry, and that's where my magic's coming from. And maybe I'm even a dragonborn, because why not? They have charisma, so it could be worse. And you've got fire breath weapon, and you've got fire everything, and so why not take the affinity with fire? So it can be pretty decent. Anyways, I'm starting to ramble. That's always a bad sign. I think the video's gone on long enough. I've talked about the main stuff I wanted to cover. So those are my thoughts on it. I'm sure I've probably missed a bunch of stuff, but whatever. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section. Maybe you've tried this kind of combination before, maybe you just thought about it, or maybe you're like, hey, I kind of like this, but maybe it would work better with a different class in there, or maybe you want to take a few levels of something else on top of that, like Bard, or maybe Fighter or something. Because if you're all multi-classing, why not go crazy and go all in? At some point, I'm actually going to make a video where we try to multi-class a character who takes every class in the entire game, and we're going to try to figure out how to make that work and be viable. Obviously, you could just take one level of everything, but your character's going to be terrible. We want to try to make somebody who takes levels of everything and is still good at, mostly every range. I think that's going to be very challenging, but we'll try to figure out how to do it. So that'll be a future video. That one's going to take some work, I think. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on Warlock Sorcerer combinations. Like I said, feel free to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and most importantly, I want to read your comments. I promise to read every comment, and I will probably respond to most of them. So that's everything I have for this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.